Hi, Adam. Thank you for
Hi.
talking to me.
Thank you so much for making the time for me.
Well, I'm thrilled because Max and the House of Spies is my favorite book, and
What?
all your book literally it's so annoying. No, you're so talented. All your books, I'm like, this is my new favorite book, and it's really interesting. Even with Grimley, I was like, how do you keep? It's really rare. I think maybe not super rare. It's maybe like 30% that authors continue to have books that are exceptional in the series. So I think you do a really good job with that, and also you're like the voiciest writer out there, I think, don't you?
Thank you. I mean, I my editor once told me we were working on Inquisitor's Tale, and in fact, I was worried about losing my voice and not sure how to write it. My editor said maybe the kindest thing that she's ever said to me. She doesn't tend to say kind things to me. My editors are really one of those tough editors, like tough love kind of people. But she said to me, Adam, I would recognize your writing if it was scrawled on a cave wall. And I was like, okay, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I guess so. And in fact, uh, when I first started writing, I started writing because I was telling stories to students. I was a teacher, and
Mhm.
I started writing by reading them a story out loud that I was writing for them every night. I would write a chapter and read it to them the next day. And then when I wanted to try to get published, I quit my job and I started to revise the book. And what had been a 100-page book became a 400-page book. And as I was revising it, I was like, if it's going to be published, it's got to sound like Johnny Tremaine, something like
Oh,
classic. Right. And
also,
so I took all the voice in, I know, and I took all the voice out of it. And I tried to make it sound, like objective. And the agent that I took it to read it and was like, no, we're not going to publish this,
yeah.
and I can't help you. Um, and then I went back and I was telling stories again to these students, and I told them fairy tale, and they afterwards they one of the little girls came up to me and she was like, you should make that into a book. And I wrote it down exactly the way I told it to them with all my jokes and warnings right in it. And I
Yeah.
sent that to the same agent, and she was like, this will make into a book. And I realized it was what I had just rediscovered was the voice I used to speak to children. I had kind of rubbed out my voice when I was revising it, and so if my books sound voicey, it's literally just because that's how I talk to kids.
Yeah, and well, and you're an oral storyteller. So I used to be a teacher too, and I
Yeah.
always thought there were kids who are summarizers and kids who are retellers, right? The
Oh,
one
that's
who you're
interesting.
like, what's the movie about? And then the kid who takes 20 minutes and they don't really even get to the point. You're like,
Totally.
let's teach you how to summarize. But and then there's the kid who's just like a boy and a dog, and that is, so you're this oral storyteller who knows how to craft a good story.
Retell the story. I don't know if I know how to summarize it. I also get lost in the details, but I'm like, it's a good story. You got to hear everything.
But that makes it a good writing transition because then you have that. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
working on being a better storyteller.
I doubt that. I have read your articles and they're excellent. But honestly, it is very different. Like writing an article, I feel like I'm bad at it. When I publish it or something, it's like, could you write an op-ed about this? I try and I just get lost
Hmm.
because first of all, when I'm writing for kids, I feel like I understand kids much better than I understand adults. Honestly, like when I'm talking to adults, usually I'm like, I don't know what you're thinking, but when I'm talking to a kid, I know what they're thinking. But the other thing is, when you're writing an article, you're making a point. And I don't make a point when I talk. I try to make lots of points. In fact, I try to ask lots of questions. And sometimes a point comes out of it, and sometimes it doesn't. So if I were to write an op-ed, I would want to write something like suggestive that asked a lot of questions, and nobody wants to publish
Yeah, it's okay. We could partner. I'll help you.
that. Okay, that sounds good.
Help me. Well, that is a good transition into the timing on this book couldn't be more, I mean, perfect. And also, I mean, you just get chills like, okay. So, what do you want the world to get out of this book? And And how would you suggest people use it with children in the classroom, in a library, I mean, that's a really big question, I know.
I'd love to answer it though.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first and foremost, what I want people, kids and adults, to get out of the book is to have a really good time reading it. It is a spy novel. It is an adventure. It's supposed to be funny. I hope it's funny. Um, uh, I have this very deep held philosophy that as a writer, your very first responsibility is to get your readers to turn the pages. If they're not turning the pages, then it doesn't matter what big highfalutin idea you have in the book, they'll never get there because they're not reading the book. So mostly I want people to have fun. That's first. And then if they're having fun, um, the idea in the book, I think there's hopefully a lot of ideas in the book, but the one that animated both Max in the House of Spies and the completion of the story, the second in the duology, Max in the Land of Lies, which will come out next year.
Okay, I did want to
is
ask that next year because I can't
next
wait to get a preview.
year. Yeah,
Like
I'm sure we can get you
that
a preview.
ending, I'm like, I'm ready. I can't wait.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yes, we can definitely get you a preview.
Thanks.
Um, and it is finished. And the major question in it is between what is right and what you love, how do you choose? When I speak to kids at schools about this book, which I've started doing, I ask them this big question. I actually use the Albert Camus quote that's the inscription of the book, and I use only part of it. And I say, between justice and my mother, I choose dot dot dot. And then the kids debate it. And we have this really interesting conversation at every school I'm at, where these kids, a lot of times it goes mom first, she made me, and then they'll swerve over to, well, but my mom is just one person, and justice is for everyone, and then they try to sort of bridge the gap. My mom would want me to choose justice, or there's no justice without my mother in the world, all sorts of things. I had one little boy say he was quite young, probably too young for the conversation, and he said, "My mom, because she cooks." And I was like, "Yes." And he goes, "Cookies." And I was like, "Yes, she makes cookies." But sometimes they ask me, "Well, what's my answer to the question?" And my answer is, I don't have an answer. If I had an answer, I wouldn't have asked it.
Mm-hmm.
My editor, who is a wise person, in addition to not being very nice, said that my best books are the ones that have questions in it that I don't know the answers to. And so when the kids and adults are reading this book, what I'm hoping is that they will wrestle with this question of, I might feel an emotional affinity to this answer, and I might feel that this answer is just or right.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I choose between them or navigate that gray space between it? And you said, this is quite a moment for this book to be coming out. And it feels like all around the world, whether it's politics in this country, it's war in the Middle East, it's a host of issues, we may have one emotional affinity and then one sort of rational or moral affinity, and how we navigate the overlap between them or the lack of overlap between them kind of determines what our moral presence is in the world. And it's not easy. I don't pretend I know how to do it. What I'm asking young people to do is to wrestle with that while also hopefully having a great time reading a spine.
Yeah. You mentioned it might have been the author's note about the fake news, how that was, or I read it somewhere, where you really
Yes.
wanted to start writing this book because of, well, I mean, for a variety of reasons, but that was one thing. And even the Allies had the propaganda, just like the Nazis did. How do you help kids navigate that in our world today? I mean, that's another like humongous question. There's
Yeah, it's really
the
complicated,
easy
right? Because,
answer.
yeah, I mean, there are people in the history who have obviously been bad. The Nazis, obviously bad. And then there have been, people that are complicated, right? In the book, the first book takes place in England, and they are sort of in the waning days of the British Empire. And the British Empire has got a pretty spotty record, right? Were very powerful. They accomplished some huge things, obviously, and they also like oppressed and killed a lot of people along the way. When I talk to my South Asian friends about Winston Churchill, they think of him as a butcher, right? They made 3 million people in India starve right during this period that he was being a hero in World War II. So we have a lot of affinities, a lot of loyalties, um, and sometimes they're to something that is like obviously good, our families. But even our families, sometimes our parents do things that are not obviously good. And so, how do we navigate those loyalties, and how do we maybe re-examine them or at least problematize them? Like, I will always be loyal to my family, and I can also see some of the errors that they make and some of the things that I want to distance myself from that I disagree with.
Mhm.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I wish you had said like, you know how to get kids to think critically, and then you just do like these 3 steps and you'll be good. Yeah.
Honestly, the way I think you get kids to think
It's not.
critically is you tell them a good story they care about, and then you ask them a question you don't know the answer to. That's
Yeah,
only 2 steps.
yeah, yeah. And if we could do that for adults right now, boy, that'd be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's easier to get kids to think critically than
I
adults.
agree. I was a literacy trainer for a while, and I was like, I think I like the kids better. I don't. The adults are a different whole. Yeah,
I'm with you. I absolutely choose kids every time.
yeah, exactly. And they still think I'm funny, which the adults really don't. So
Yeah,
it's fine.
I think you're funny, but yes, I agree with you. That's how I'm in the world too.
Yeah. Tell me how you chose, or your thinking behind the dye book and the kobold. How that was
Yeah.
so hilarious. I just love
Oh,
them so much. And I've seen a lot of your interviews as I was doing prep. I know you all are, and you wrote the books. But you're a big mythical creatures fan. Me too. So
yeah.
my favorite.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you like them. They, the first impulse behind them was that if this is going to be a book about a kid navigating World War II and Nazi Germany, it's going to be like dark and it could get heavy. And
Mhm.
I don't want to write a heavy book. I want to write books with heavy issues, weighty questions. I don't want it to feel heavy. Again, because I want kids to turn the pages and I want kids to enjoy turning the pages. And so it was important to find a sense of humor. And so they were very clearly the Dybbuk, the Kobold, Stein and Berg, who are on the left and right shoulders, um, are an opportunity for humor. But I also wanted the kid in the book, just like the kid in real life, not to feel alone. In a
Mm.
lot of my books, there is a storyteller's voice that cares for the kid, that says, oh, this part's going to be scary. And that, as I said, literally comes out of my experience telling fairy tales to kids in classrooms, right? I take care of the kids. And so when I write the book, somebody needs to be taking care of the kids. And so often in my books, it has been a narrator.
Mhm.
And in this book, I tried 2 immortal creatures that appear on Max's shoulders. They are taking care of both the kid readers, but also they're kind of, despite being there to heckle and annoy Max, ultimately their presence is taking care of him too and giving him sort of a non-kid, a kind of adult voice to at least chat with.
Mhm. Well, and they had their own arc also, which was kind of fun.
Yes, I'm glad that that came out, and their arc gets even more pronounced in the second volume.
I can't wait. That's and so book 2, when does it come out?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a pub date yet, but I am praying it'll be February of 2025, so
Okay,
soon in
that's
the new year.
great. Yeah, you never really know with these things, right?
Yes, but we're far along in the editorial process. We feel pretty good about where we are.
Okay, good. Yay. Do you find inspiration everywhere? Where do you get your ideas?
My ideas, first of all, come from, not to sound like a broken record, but like from problems that I don't know the answers to, the things that are bothering me. So you talked about fake news a little bit. It was the early days of the pandemic, and it felt like everyone was lying. And it wasn't clear whether people knew that they were lying or not, right?
Yeah.
Some people you were pretty sure they knew. Other people you were like, I think they think they're telling the truth, but it turns out what they said last week isn't right. Am I supposed to wear a mask or not? I mean, I heard very earnest people on both sides of the debate about masks. I didn't know the answer.
Yeah.
So as I was, feeling that problem of like, there are people out there who are lying and they may not know it. And those people who do know it, like, why? Why is it okay with them?
Mhm.
And why are the people who are believing lies, believing things that they are too smart to believe, right? I don't want to make anyone out there feel stupid, but the people who injected bleach into their veins and died, right? That happened,
Oh, I
right?
didn't know that.
Yeah. Somebody
Oh,
injected bleach into their veins because
okay.
they said that's how you could cure COVID, right? We know you don't inject bleach into your veins, right? So
Yeah.
what happens when you short circuit your own thought processes to believe somebody? Why do you do that? And that question made me think about the Nazi period,
Mhm.
where Germany had been the most educated country in the world. Its epithet was the land of poets and thinkers, is what it was called. And then this guy arose, Adolf Hitler, who was like, I will make this country strong and powerful again, but you just have to believe all of the hateful things I believe. That Jews are bad, that non-white people are bad, that gay people are bad, that disabled people are bad. You have to believe all that stuff. And Germany said yes. They decided to believe it.
Intelligent, educated people.
Right,
Kind of
exactly.
seeing some of that today.
Yeah. And so that's what was driving me crazy. And that's what I wanted to explore. So
Cool.
the idea comes first from this question, and then I start reading. And
Mm.
I read stories about Nazis. I mean, not just stories. I read history, like historical stories about Nazis, and then I start reading about spies, and I read about radio and the way propaganda is used and spying with radio and all of those things. Like they're exciting things in each. Well, that would make a good story. That would make a good story, and I just make them into a list, and then I'm like, okay, now I start to see my story coming together.
Oh, okay. When did Max come in? Did you have all that research and then then he popped into the
Well,
equation?
in some ways, Max was kind of there before even I was asking those questions because a close family friend of mine, I wrote about this, I think, in the afterword of the book, was a man named Michael Steinberg. Michael was a music critic back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And he was a close friend of the family, and he had been on the Kindertransport. He had been one of the children taken out of Nazi Germany, sent out by his mother um, to a country, England, that he didn't know anybody in, didn't speak the language in. Um, and when I explain this to kids, and not everybody knows this, the reason they had to send their children is because England agreed to take 10,000 Jewish children, but not their parents, because they had too many Jews already. So Michael went, and he was one of the lucky ones. His mother survived the war and was able to join him afterwards. Most of those kids, their parents did not survive
Yeah.
the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So that story was always in my head as an amazing story that I felt like would be ripe for telling as a book, but I didn't know like what else I wanted to say about that. And so when this question about lies came up, that seemed to dovetail together really well. And I had been reading a lot of wonderful books by John le Carré, spy novels. He's, I think, one of the greatest novelists of the last 100 years. And also Ben McIntyre, who writes some of the best nonfiction books that I've ever read, which are spy nonfiction books. And so between like my new excitement about the spy books and this question I was wrestling with, and this, Max Michael story that always been in my brain, um, those are the three ingredients that came together to make the book.
Yeah, I love how it's not a straight historical fiction novel because it's this mashup which makes it so compelling to read. I think, I wouldn't even say fantasy, I don't know how magical-ish, fantasy-ish,
Yeah, I mean,
and
I think of it as
historical.
historical fantasy.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, it is more fiction than fantasy for sure. I mean, more
Yeah.
historical than fantasy
Right.
for sure.
Right. But it
Historical
really
fantasy.
works, which
Thank
is,
you.
and I don't see that as much as I would like to. There are certain authors where you're like, you did it. But
Yeah, it's a fun way of doing it. I mean, I think I first kind of got the idea for historical fantasy in Inquisitor's Tale because it's this world where I knew a lot of the history. My wife is a professor of medieval history, and so I was encountering the history a lot. But also, they had all this folklore that felt like so rich, and uh, why not take their belief system seriously? Why not? Why say like, well, I know none of that really happened. Well, they believed it was happening. They believed they were dragons.
yeah.
We found dinosaur bones, right? It's comprehensible why you would think they were dragons. Why not take their belief system seriously and combine the history that we were pretty sure did happen with the mythology that they were pretty sure was happening?
Mhm. And it worked. That was really innovative too.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about the book? I just want to be respectful of your time and anything you want to say it for writers who are going to listen and want read this interview that you would want to.
Yeah, I mean, I have a million things that I could say to writers. I say different things, certain things to kid writers and other things to
Yeah.
grown-up writers. Uh, to kid writers, I always say that the most important thing that you can do is spend as much time as you can imagining. Everyone says read a lot, and yes, reading is super important. And if you want to be a writer, you should write. Yeah, that makes sense, definitely. But
Mhm.
even before you write, if a kid, spends time imagining, be it reading, be it playing, with toys or talking to themselves in their room or out on the basketball court telling themselves stories as they're shooting hoops. I know I used to do that as a kid all the time, pretending I was an NBA star. Like all of that is writing. And eventually you'll write it down. But so that's what I tell kids. And for the grown-ups out there who are writing, uh, for me, it's that I have to think really honestly about my readers, really honestly about whether they're going to be enjoying it. So not only do I, after I write my books, I read them out loud to myself and not under my breath, like out loud, out loud.
Yeah.
And it means you got to find a quiet space. I do it in the park. People in my neighborhood think that I'm the local, crazy person, but that's what I do. And I have to read it out loud because um, we have been hearing language a lot longer than we've been reading it. And so our ears, our actual ears, are very attuned to what language sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exhausting to read it out loud, not just because you're producing your voice, but because it's this radical act of empathy where you are imagining the people who would be listening to it. And are they like, ugh, that's lame, or ugh, I'm bored? Because you have to be really honest and hard on yourself. Like, is this really funny? Is it really exciting? Now, that doesn't mean I recommend like tinkering forever. Tinkering forever is not good either.
Yeah.
Once it feels good, yeah, you could change this or you could change that. But if you're like, man, I love this, it's funny, I can't stop reading it myself, then it's time to share it with the world. And then don't be shy. You gotta be courageous to put your writing out there. It's not easy.
Good advice. I worry with the kid writers with all that is just, I think about this for myself because I'm like, am I stuffing my brain full of something every single moment, even if it's book,
Yes.
even if it's good, not TV or shows, but it's so much input. So sitting quietly and imagining, it's sort of this lost skill in a way,
Unfortunately, that is true. Yes, getting the kids away from the electronics, if you're a parent or a teacher or whatever, is so crucial. And that's why I write in the park actually, because I don't get Wi-Fi out there. Because the internet is now more powerful than I am. It's like I'm like, well, I just need to research one thing, like I just need to look up, whatever, how long it took to fly a bomber from Berlin to London or vice versa.
Mhm.
And then, an hour later, I'm like, what happened to my writing time? So,
Yeah.
get away from the Wi-Fi signal if you can. And as a kid,
Advice.
right? Like the internet will not help you write a book, but your imagination will be the muscles that you use to write.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I agree with you.
Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I'm so grateful that you read it and enjoyed it.
I
I'm
loved it.
moved by that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I really loved it. And I can only aspire to be as voicey as you one day. I just love
You
it.
have
And
a you have a great voice, and it's got to be your voice. It can't be my
yeah,
voice.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not as I have my own voice. It's you sometimes compare yourself with other writers and it's different. It's like that. Well, I remember when I first started freelancing, I'm like, do I call myself a writer? And I was like, well, yeah, I write. It might not be very good, but I write.
And it is very
Sometimes I make money.
good.
Yeah.
That's an exceedingly rare thing. Being a professional writer who makes money, that's a hard thing to achieve indeed.
Yeah, I left the classroom thinking, what will I do next? Oh, writing, because that is so lucrative. I don't know what I was thinking, but it's okay. It worked
It's
out.
working out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's
It was
really
such a
nice
pleasure talking
to
to you.
you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Adam.